everybody.
Okay.
Today's daf is Masechta Bava Metzia, daf Chof Ches. And we're going to
Ja.
start.
Ja. Heb je het Messias jetzt genoeg te maken?
Yeah. Okay, the halten do we're holding over here by the subject of Simonim Deraisim, Simonim Derabonim. Very important. To understand very clearly, the Torah says there's two ways when somebody comes to you and says that the item that you found is theirs, they can bring Adim that it's theirs. That's easy. So now that proves that it's theirs. Or is Simonim, if they bring symbols, signs that proves that it was theirs. Now, the Gemara has a question. If they bring a simon, that's absolutely fantastic. They say there was a hole in the by that letter, so a real good simon, that's Suman Movak. Everybody agrees that it works. The question is they give a simon, but it's not so good. I mean, it's okay. They say it was, they say whatever you found, let's say you found the talus, it was 3 feet by 2 feet. So they give you measurements. So it's not or they tell you the color of the talus or something like that. So it's not so clear that it's a great simon. So then that's a machlokes. Do you return the item to that person or not? If they give you a bad simon, they say it was a white talus, with a black mark. So then that's a bad simon. But if they give you a mediocre simon, there's a machlokes in the Gemara. If midoraisa, you are obligated to return it to the person that says it's theirs, or not. So we were holding, it's only midrabanan. So the Gemara says like this: let us say it's a machlokes tanoim if simonim is the raisa or not. The Mishnah, the Brisa says, if somebody is a dead person and you want to tell his wife, oh, your husband died. So if you don't know, you can't prove if the person that you saw is the actually dead husband. So just saying, oh, he had a wart on his body, that doesn't prove you saw the right person. Rabaz ben Avai would say that if you say you saw the wart and that was unique to her husband, then that's good enough, and the woman is now permitted to get married based on the testimony that person is dead. So is a wart a good simon or a wart is not a good simon? So my lab halkom b'palgi, isn't this the machlokes tanoim? Tanakama sofas simon derabanim. Tanakama holds simon derabanim. So this is a weaker type of simon. Therefore, you can't let a woman get married based on that. He holds simon is daraisa. So there you go. There you have it. It's a machlokes tanoim. So the Gemara says, Amarava, not true. Both Tanoim could agree, Simonim deraisa. Simonim are deraisa. But is this a good simon? The machlokes is that this wart is possible to have, somebody else could have the same exact wart in the same exact location. Let's say he has a wart on his chin. So there are people who are born with the same mazel, Rashi says, that could have the same exact wart. The Tanakama holds the Shuma could be possible by somebody with the same mazel. No, a wart is distinct, and it could only be by one person, by nobody else. If you want, it's still Simonim Doraisa. Really, it's a good simon. But the question is, since this is a type of simon that's ultimately could change colors after the person dies, so maybe you're gonna see it one color, but perhaps when the guy was alive, it was a different color. So therefore, you didn't see the right person. The simon could change after the person dies, so you're giving the wrong simon. A wart will stay with its same color, and therefore it would be considered a good simon. If you want to tell you, everybody holds simonim derbanan, and a wart never changes after a person dies. Is this wart a great simon? So it's a great simon, and therefore, even if you hold simonim is rabbanim, it would work even on a deraisa level because it's a super duper good simon. And the other man, the Tanakama holds simon is not considered a good super duper good simon. Okay, new Gemara, but this is again to understand. Remember, if it's a super duper good simon, everybody agrees it works minat Torah. It's the question is giving a mediocre simon, does it work midat Torah or rabbanan? So the question that Rav is going to ask, why would Chachamim say that if Midoraisa doesn't work, if you give a mediocre simon, Rabbanan says, no, you should return it to the finder. Why? Amar Rava, imtim tzoloimus simonim lav daraisa, heiche madrina aveda simonim. How do we return an aveda just by the guy giving simonim? In other words, why would Chachamim make such a tikkun that if someone gives a mediocre simon, you're obligated to return it to that person? Answers Rava, the guy that finds it wants to return it with simonim. The finder has this excuse. It says, like, if I'm going to be nice to somebody and return him this item, even though he's giving me a bad simon, so when I lose something, I'll also give a bad simon, not such a great simon, and they're going to return it to me. So the finder is agreeable to this agreement, to this situation. Amalei Rav Safra says, at the end of the day, that's not your money. If the finder finds something, perhaps this item that he found belongs to somebody else. So you're saying that, he should return it to whoever gives him a mediocre simon, because when he's going to lose something, they're going to return things to him. But at the end of the day, perhaps you're returning to the wrong person. Ella, Rav explained, the owner of the item that lost it doesn't mind if you return it with mediocre simonim. Made the yad edim leslie, because when he lost it, he knows he doesn't even have edim to prove that the item that he lost is his. Umeima Amar, and he says, Kuli amalu simonim muvakim didab. Nobody knows, and this muvakim means mediocre simonim that I'm going to give. Not everybody's going to know the length and the width of the item that I lost. I know it. Vano yavina, and I'm going to give it. Simonim muvakim didav. Then I'll be able to give it. In other words, even the owner is satisfied that you return it to him with mediocre simonim, even though there is a strong possibility somebody else could give that simonim. Still, this is why Chachamim made that even with mediocre simonim, you return the item to the person that claims it's his. Says the Gemara, that we learn. If a guy lost contracts, and there's one lender that's written on all these contracts, so you're going to return it to the lender. Now, will every borrower agree that you should return it to the lender? I mean, maybe it's the borrowers. Why would we lost a lost loan document to a lender? If you're saying that we have to assume that the borrower would agree to that, why would a borrower agree to that? If as long as you don't return it to the lender, he doesn't have to pay. Malay. So Rava answered, it's obviously logically that it was dropped by the lender, because if you have one borrower and three lenders, it must have fell from the borrowers. That's most likely these belong to the borrower, because his name is on all three documents, and the lender is different loan companies. So therefore, it must belong to the borrower, and he actually paid the loan. And the opposite is also true. 3 people that borrowed from one lender, right? So obviously the Gabi that most of the documents, it's obviously that the documents belong to the lender, because his name is on all three documents. That's why we return it to the lender. Now the Gemara asks, we go to Chav Ches Amar Aleph, and if you find a bundle of loan documents, and the guy who claims it's his loan documents, it could be a lender, and he tells you the amount of loan documents or how it was tied together, and you return it to him. So you don't really have an obvious reason why you're returning it to the lender, except that he gave simonim. But if he's just giving simonim, the borrower wouldn't agree that you should just return it to the lender based on simonim. Would the borrower agree that you should return it to the lender? As long as you don't return it, he doesn't have to pay the loan. So if simonim is only drabanan, why are we returning it to a lender who claims it's his by just giving simonim? Rava concluded, simonim da'iraisa. If you give mediocre simonim, the finder has to return it to you because that is min Torah. The Torah doesn't demand that the person that lost the object has to give a super duper simon. He can give a mediocre simon, like saying how wide and length it is or how much it weighs. The ksiv that the finder has to keep it until the person who claims it's his proves that it's his. Would you ever think that you have to return it to the person who claims it's his without investigating the matter? What the Torah is telling you, darshui im ramai who ain't a ramai. Try to investigate whether he is telling you the truth that it's his item or not. And how do you investigate that? La b'simonim, it must be that you're using simonim. Shmamina. So Rava proves from the Chumash that simonim are deraisa. Amar Rava. So Rava said, if that's the case, if timtzu loim is simonim deraisa, would you think that simonim is deraisa? So the Gemara interrupts Rava's statement. Im timtzu loim hapashal le simonim deraisa. Didn't Rava just prove from this pasuk over here that it is deraisa? What did Rava have? Was still in doubts whether simonim is deraisa. We could have said, like we answered before, that the Torah says that the person who claims it's his has to prove himself. Maybe the Torah means he proves himself by bringing witnesses that the item belongs to him. So it's not so clear if simonim is deraisa or not. But even if you want to say simonim is deraisa, let's say he's giving you another number of cases. Simonim is simonim. You have two people claiming that it's them. Each one bringing simonim. What do? Who do you give it to? Yaniach. So that the Torah tells you, Yaniach. You leave it. Simonim ve'edim. One guy brings simonim, and one guy brings edim that the item is his. You nasi lebala edim. You give it to the one that brings edim that it's his. Simonim ve'simonim ve'edecha. One guy brings simonim, the other guy brings simonim, and one guy brings an edecha that it's his. So he has, in addition to simonim, he has one witness that backs up his story. Edecha commander leisidami ve'yaniach. The finder just ignores the edecha and just holds on to it till Eliyahu Navi comes. Let's say you have Eidei Ariga, Eidei Nefilim. Let's say you have a talus. The guy finds a talus. So one guy brings Eidis that it was his talus. He wove the talus. One guy says he brings Eidis that it fell from his wagon. You give it to the person that it fell from his wagon. The Amrinim, because we say Zabuni Zabna, the person who made the talus sold it. And fell from somebody else. What happens if somebody gives midas arkay, midas rachbay? He tells you the exact dimension of the talus. So that's one person. But one guy says the length, and one guy says the width. Who do you give it to? Tinasei midas arkay. Give it to the person who gives you the length. The midas rachbay shuuri kabashayle kad mechasale maravekoy. Because width, the guy who says the width, possibly it's not his talus. He's just estimated because he saw somebody else wear it. So it may not be his talus, but midas arkay lo mishtayla. Nobody can estimate the length of a talus. So therefore, it must be that the guy that says that the length of the talus, he must be telling the truth. Again, we're trying to figure out who's telling the truth. Midas arkay, midas rachbay. Guy gives you the exact length, he gives you the exact width. But the other guy gives you midas gamav. He gives you the square dimensions, the square area of the item. Who do you give it to? So the one who's more precise is the nasin. You give it to labidis orkay v'rachbay, the guy that gives you the length and the width of the talus. What happens if somebody gives you midas orkay, midas rachbay? He gives you the dimensions of the talus, but the other guy gives you the weight of the talus, midas mishkaloisav. Who do you give it to? Who wins? You nasin lamidas mishkaloisav. You give it to the guy that gives you the weight. Now the Gemara talks about interesting. Who oimes simone get? The guy finds a get on the floor. The husband gives you simonim of the get. He marries simon again. She tells you simon get. Now the husband is the one that's writing the get, so you expect him to know the simonim. But if the woman knows the simonim of get, it must be that she received the get already. So you're not saying law, you give it to her. But so the Gemara says, what kind of simonim does a woman give you that to prove that the get fell from her? She gives you the dimensions of the get. Maybe she saw it was on her husband's desk. The husband didn't give it to her, but she estimated the length and width of the get. Ella, she has to give you a real good siman. Nekav yesh b'tzad oispleni. She says there's a hole mark by this, the little hole, a pinhole by that letter in the get. So only if she held on to get would she have known such a thing. Only then you would give her the get. Who aimer simone achut v'hi aimer simone achut. Let's say she tells you it was wrapped up like a diploma, the get, and he gives you simonim of the bow, and she gives you simonim of the string that's wrapping the get. You're not saying you give it to her. So the Gemara says, "B'mai, what is she saying about the string that proves that it was hers?" She's saying it was a white string or green string. Maybe she saw her husband holding on to this get, and she saw the color of the string. So how that doesn't prove that she actually received the get. Ella b'midas orkai. She gave you the exact length of the string. Well, that would only occur if the string was actually in her hand, that she held on to the get. Who ameris b'chabisa? He ameris b'chabisa. She says that it was in a pouch, and he says it was in a pouch. You know, so you give it to him. My tama made the other choma the islay b'chabisa d'machlei. She already knows the nature of her husband, and everything that she has, he already puts it in a pouch. So if she claims, oh, you found it in a pouch, that doesn't prove that it's hers. So you should give the get back to him. Now the Mishnah says you have to announce that you found something. How long do you have to keep announcing it? Until the neighbors about where you found it know that you found something there. They have to be notified that somebody found something in their neighborhood. Rabbi Yehuda says you go to the Beis Hamikdash and Shalosh Regalim, and you have to announce it for 3 Yom Tivs. Every Yom Tiv you have to announce you found something. And then you have to stay after the final Yom Tiv, Shiva Yom. You can't take the first flight out back home. You have to wait another 7 days after the Yom Tiv, so that if somebody thought that he lost the item, he should be able to go to his other part of Israel, Shloisha, the Yachsa Shloisha, and then come back to the Beis Hamikdash, the Yachras Yamechan, and then you make the announcement on the 7th day that did anybody go home and see that they're missing a talis or something, and then he'll claim it. So you have to give somebody a chance to go back home, see if he actually lost the item that you're claiming that you found, and be able to make it back in the Beis Hamikdash. So therefore, the guy that finds it, he's really stuck, because he has to announce it every Yom Tov that he found something, and the last for the 3rd Yom Tov, that's the last time he's going to make the announcement, he has to stay in Yerushalayim for another 7 days, so that if the guy who potentially lost it can go home for 3 days, check his wardrobe, and then come back to the Beis Hamikdash, and claim that the item that you found is his. Now, Rameir said, Tanish Cheni Aveda. Rameir said that it's the items have to be found that you have to make it notified of the neighbors of where the lost item. My Shcheni Aveda, Elaim Shcheni to Bal Aveda, Yod Leza Lahadre de Harle. What do you mean the neighbors? The neighbors of the guy that lost it. So if you know who lost it, go give it to him. Like we explained in the Mishnah, you have to make the announcement such that everybody who lives in the vicinity of where you found it knows that you found something in that area. Rabbi Yehuda Oimer. So we said in our Mishnah that according to Rabbi Yehuda, it takes basically it takes 3 days to go from one part of Israel to the other part of Israel, because basically the guy that lost it, that lost the item, has to go home to check to see if he lost it. And the furthest distance from Jerusalem is a 3-day trip. So is that true? Or a minute, I'll ask you a contradiction. But that means, according to Rabbi Gamliel, you don't say, let's say, the same Talamat Racha until 15 days after Sukkot, because the last person, it takes 15 days from him to go home from the Beis Hamikdash. So we see, to get to one part of Israel from Jerusalem to the most extreme part of Israel takes at least 15 days. And our Mishnah says 3 days. Amar Rav Yosef says, like Kasha, it's not difficult. Tam b'migdash rishon, tam b'migdash sheni. B'migdash rishon, if Yish Yisrael tevuva, t'ksib Yehuda Yisrael Rabban Kol Hashal Yom Ulroiv Binin Kulahai. During the first Beis Hamikdash, where the many Jews lived in Israel, so then it took you a trip of at least 15 days to go from Jerusalem back home after Oilul Regel. But in the second base of Migdash, there was not so many Jews living in Israel during that time, during the second Commonwealth. To get to where the furthest Jew lived, it took a 3-day trip. There's a pasuk that says that during the second base of Migdash, the Jews lived very far from Jerusalem in the cities that the Jews lived during the time of the first base of Migdash. So the Abaye says, but keeping the hochi, if I'm correct, I would say just the opposite, that during the base of Migdash, during the first base of Migdash, it was a shorter trip because there's more public transportation that will get you faster from your location to Israel, so to Yerushalayim, so it could take a 3-day trip. But Migdasheni, there was not so many Jews, so the trains didn't run, or the caravans didn't run that often, and therefore it may have taken 15 days. That's what Abaye says. Migdash Rishon and Yisrael Tuva, the mitzvahs Alma. There's a lot of big crowds, and the caravans run during the day and the nighttime. Public transportation runs fast. It was enough for 3 days to get from Jerusalem to the other side of Israel. In the Migdash Sheni, you needed much more time because in Migdash Sheni, it was not that many people. So that's Abaye's teretz, and so therefore we entered the contradiction that between our Mishnah, which says that it takes 3 days to go from Jerusalem to the furthest part of Israel, and the Mishnah in Masechta Rosh Hashanah, which says it takes 15 days. Rava says basically, Rava said we're going to expect the guy that lost the item to make a move on it, and therefore Chachamim did not bother the person that found the Aveda more to stay in his locale much more than needed. 7 days was enough to hold him up. At the end of the day, he found something. He's doing somebody a favor. Amar Ravina Shmamina. Ravina said, "Mamina, we hear from here. Galima machris. When you announce, you have to announce that you found a talis. You don't say I found a lost item. The if you can announce that, oh, I lost. You announced the announcement. It sounds like, oh, you found a lost item. You still has to know if he doesn't know what was lost. So every person is going to go home and now check around their whole house to see what was lost. Perhaps they lost something. That takes more time. So we can't expect him to come back after 7 days. El Shmamina, it must be, you have to tell them something, what you found. Glima machra Shmamina. When you make the announcement, you don't make the announcement, oh, I found a lost item. You say, I actually found a talis. Rava says, you could even say that you found a lost item. Again, we don't matriach, we don't bother the person who found the item to stay longer. If a guy really lost it, it'll take him 1 day to look into his entire house to figure out what he lost and then make his way back in time to the base of Migdash within the 7-day period after Yom Tov is over. Tana Rabbanan, Regel Rishon, the announcement goes like this. By the way, after Regel Shlishi, you're allowed to keep it. I mean, you hold on to it to do Eliyahu and Navid come. You don't have to make announcements anymore. But Regel Rishon, the first time you show up to the base of Migdash, you say Regel Rishon. Regel Sheni, Omer Regel Sheni. Regel Shlishi, Omer Stam. By the third time, you don't say, this is the third time you're making the announcement. You just say, I found something. So the Gemara says, Vamai, Lema Regel Shlishi. Why shouldn't you say, this is the third time you're making the announcement, and everybody will know this is the last time you're making the announcement? Because some people will hear the word Shlishi, and it sounds like Sheni. So they'll think they have more time. So therefore, you don't say the word Shlishi. So the Gemara says, Sheni Nami, we go to Amar Beis, Asid Lachlufi Berishin. A person is going to make a mistake. If you say it's the second one, he's going to think it's the first one. So the Gemara says that no problem with that. But he'll eventually, even if he made that mistake and comes back, and he's going to come back, and it's still the guy's going to be announcing it because it will be the third regel. So by the third regel, you don't make the announcement. Okay, a little bit more further. Turn Rabbanim. So this was the time during the Beis HaMikdash, right? You went to the Beis HaMikdash and made the announcement. During the time of the Beis Hamikdash, you went to the Oile Regel when everybody joined and you made the announcement that you found something. When the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, they make the announcements in shuls that you found something. And now the Gemara says something interesting. There were people who confiscated items on behalf of the government. If you say you found something, a guy who works for the government, a Jewish guy who works for the government, will say, "Oh, you don't give it back. Bring it to the government. It belongs to the government. Once somebody loses something, it belongs to the government." So they didn't want these people to interfere with the process of Hashavas Aveda. All you have to make is a private, little announcement to your friends, relatives, and that's it. Put it on a WhatsApp chat. Who are the anasim? The Amri, they were the Jewish, confiscators. The Amri, they were saying, whatever you lose belongs to the king. Says the Gemara's story. Rabami found a pile of gold, and so he saw a person that was very afraid. And the guy was afraid to say that the pile of dinarin were his. Amalei, so Rabami says, you can keep this money. And I'm not a Persian, that whatever you lost belongs to the kings. This was a rule in the Persian government. Tanraban, we learned. This is a big stone that was in Jerusalem. Whoever lost an item would go to there. It was a meeting place for a lost item found. This guy would stand on that big stone and say, "I found this and this." And the guy who claims it's his would give Simonim a night and take it. That's what we learned, that this Even Atayim was such a very huge stone, and we learned that story about Chani Amalgam regarding that stone. Anyhow, one more. Let's try the Mishnah. Ama as Aveda, v'loy Ama as Simana. We'll just do the Mishnah. He just said the Aveda didn't give the exact symbols of what it was. Don't give it to him. V'haramai, but if you know this guy is a deceitful person, he's a well-known deceitful person, even if he gives you simanim, you should not give it to him. The Mishnah says, if he's a known guy that deceits people, then he has to not only prove that the item belongs to him, but he has to prove that he's no more a deceitful person. Okay, so we stopped on Ches Amid Beis by the Gemara, by the second Gemara. We'll continue in.
Thank you.